The wedding of Felipe, my beloved grandson, was held in a stunning seaside villa, where the first rays of sunlight gleamed off the sparkling water. The surrounding atmosphere was like a perfect painting, with shimmering golden lights from the grand chandeliers, vibrant fresh flowers in every corner, and tables full of exquisite dishes. Guests, dressed in elegant attire, wore bright smiles as the soft music played in the background, creating a joyful, celebratory mood. I, Veronica Alvarado, stood amidst the crowd, smiling happily, but there was an uneasy feeling deep within me. Although everything seemed perfect on the surface, something didn't feel right. Felipe's wedding was a beautiful day, but I couldn't relax with Lara, my daughter-in-law, in attendance. Lara, with her charming looks and sweet words, was always the center of attention. She managed to make everyone feel like they were the focus of the conversation, but I couldn't help but sense the insincerity in her every glance. I've lived long enough to know that things are rarely as perfect as they appear, and I could tell that Lara had an agenda beyond just being the perfect daughter-in-law. Felipe, the groom, looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his eyes full of pride and happiness as he stood next to his bride, Julia. Their love, pure and sincere, seemed like a perfect picture on this special day. Julia looked radiant in her white gown, her face glowing with joy. But amidst the crowd, I couldn't take my eyes off Lara. She stood with her friends, always managing to draw attention to herself, but I could tell something was off. She was subtly approaching guests, whispering in their ears, putting on a show of concern for the wedding, but in reality, she was spreading something more malicious. Felipe and Julia shared a sweet moment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. I heard Lara whispering to a group of guests, "I've heard Julia's family has some serious financial issues, and maybe she's not the right one for Felipe after all." Her words were not innocent, and they struck me like a warning bell. I had to remain calm, but I knew I couldn't sit back and let this continue. I heard her again in the next corner of the room, talking to another set of guests, dropping more veiled insults about Julia's family. Her strategy was clear: destabilize the family and create doubt about Julia's worthiness of Felipe. When I looked back at Lara, she was still holding court with her friends, always in the spotlight, but I felt it. She was playing a game, and it was one I was determined not to lose. As Felipe and Julia exchanged vows, their eyes locked with love, and my heart swelled with pride and emotion. Their love was a beautiful thing, something to be cherished. But still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion I had about Lara's intentions. It wasn't just a wedding today, it was a battle that I had to win. Lara's whispers were growing louder as the ceremony went on, but I kept my composure. Everything was moving too smoothly, too perfectly, but I knew that something was about to break. I just didn't know when. The wedding reception was held in a magnificent garden pavilion, a picturesque setting with twinkling fairy lights and white flowers that had been meticulously arranged by Julia herself. She was always so practical, even on her special day, and I admired that about her. As the evening unfolded, the joy of the event was almost palpable, guests mingling, laughing, sharing toasts, and celebrating the union of Felipe and Julia. But then there was Lara. She kept moving from group to group, her laughter just a little too loud, her gestures just a little too grand. She had been in her element all day, but now I could see her true purpose. It wasn't just about being the star of the show. She was planting seeds, subtle, quiet seeds of doubt about Julia and her family. I noticed something odd. Lara was engaging in hushed conversations with several guests. They would nod sympathetically, glance in Julia's direction, then quickly turn away, clearly unsettled by something. I wasn't sure what exactly Lara was telling them, but it was clear. She was spreading rumors. I couldn't let this go on. I excused myself from a conversation with some of my old friends and slipped away to observe from a distance. As I watched Lara, I realized she was using the wedding as the perfect cover for her scheming. Her eyes gleamed with calculated satisfaction, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head as she worked to undermine everything. Then I saw her approach an older couple from the other side of the room. The conversation was brief, but the reaction was immediate. The woman's face went pale, and her husband's eyes narrowed in suspicion. It wasn't hard to guess what Lara had said to them. I tried to ignore it at first. After all, I had my hands full watching the celebration unfold and enjoying my time with some of the other guests. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Why was Lara stirring up trouble in her own son's wedding? What was she trying to accomplish? I couldn't let her tarnish this day, not for Felipe, not for Julia, and certainly not for me. But I knew better than to confront her directly. No, this required strategy. As I continued to watch, I overheard one of the guests mutter, "I heard Julia's father had some legal troubles a few years back. And didn't her mother have a problem with alcohol? It's all so suspicious." I froze. This was no longer just casual gossip. Lara was orchestrating a full-blown smear campaign against Julia's family. She was trying to make them seem unworthy, unfit for Felipe. The thought of it made my blood run cold. It was cruel and unjust, and I couldn't allow it. At that moment, I made a decision. It was time to fight back. I quickly excused myself from the group I was with and made my way to the restroom, hoping for a brief moment of solitude to gather my thoughts. Inside, there were several women touching up their makeup and adjusting their dresses. It was busy, but I overheard something that made my heart skip a beat. A woman whispered, "Did you hear about the Chens? Lara says Robert's got a criminal background, something about tax evasion. And the mother? Well, the less we say about that, the better." My stomach churned. I knew exactly what Lara was doing. She was weaving a web of lies, trying to poison everyone's perception of Julia's family. I couldn't stand by any longer. I had to act. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia, the forensic accountant I had hired months ago when I first noticed discrepancies in the family finances. She had been discreetly gathering information for me, and now it was time to make sure the truth came to light. "Patricia, it's Veronica," I said, my voice low but steady. "Activate the investigation. Lara's making her move, and it's time we fought back." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. I had no idea how far Lara had gone, but I knew one thing for sure: this wedding wasn't going to end quietly. The reception continued, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension building. The guests, once lively and full of cheer, now seemed more reserved. Conversations were quieter, glances exchanged behind hands, and I noticed more than a few heads turning in Julia's direction with looks of uncertainty. It was like a storm was slowly rolling in, and no one was safe from it. Lara, on the other hand, was thriving in this atmosphere. Her movements were more deliberate now, as if she was savoring the chaos she was sowing. Every time she spoke, her voice was a little louder, her gestures more exaggerated. It was as though she was putting on a show, and the audience was entirely willing to buy into whatever she was selling. I could see her circling around the room, moving from one group of guests to another, all the while casting glances at Julia, who seemed oblivious to the growing storm. Julia, sweet and trusting, was still chatting happily with the guests, clearly unaware of the web of lies being spun just a few feet away from her. I felt my heart ache for her. This was supposed to be her day, the happiest day of her life, and yet here was Lara, ruining it with her poison. As I watched, I saw Lara slide into a conversation with one of the older women from the guest list. The woman's face, at first friendly, soon transformed into one of discomfort. Lara had struck again. I couldn't hear exactly what was being said, but the subtle shifts in body language were enough to tell me that more lies were being fed to unsuspecting guests. It was time to act. I excused myself from my conversation and made my way toward the bar. As I passed by one of the smaller groups of guests, I overheard something that stopped me dead in my tracks. "I can't believe the nerve of her," one woman whispered to another. "Did you hear that Julia's family has a history of legal trouble, tax issues, prison time? Lara said it was all kept hidden from Felipe. He has no idea what he's getting into." My blood boiled. I knew immediately that Lara was behind this. It was one thing to gossip, but to outright slander a family like this, to lie and twist the truth to ruin someone's reputation, was something else entirely. I was on the verge of confronting her right then and there, but I stopped myself. The wedding wasn't the place for that, not yet. I needed something more than just words. I needed proof. Proof that would show everyone what Lara was really up to. I looked around the room and saw her again, her head tilted in that false, sweet way she had, smiling as if she were the very picture of graciousness. But I knew better. I knew her for what she was: calculating, manipulative, and dangerous. I walked out of the pavilion, heading toward the patio for a breath of fresh air. I needed a moment to think. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't ease the tightness in my chest. I was running out of time. I had to expose Lara before she did any more damage. And then it hit me. I had something she didn't expect. Something that could destroy her lies, rip away the mask she wore. I pulled my phone out of my purse and quickly dialed Patricia's number again. "Patricia, it's Veronica," I said, my voice a bit firmer this time. "I need you to prepare everything we discussed. We're going public. Tonight." Patricia confirmed she'd be ready, and I hung up, a surge of determination flooding through me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Lara had been manipulating things for far too long, but tonight, everything was about to change. The truth would come out, and Lara would finally face the consequences of her actions. I returned to the reception with a newfound resolve. I could feel the tension in the air, but I was ready to face it head-on. I wasn't going to let her destroy this day, not without a fight. And that fight, it was just getting started. By the time I returned to the reception, the atmosphere was charged with a different energy. It was as if everyone had sensed that something was wrong, but no one had yet dared to confront it. The soft music continued, but it felt muffled now, as if the sound was being swallowed by the tension in the room. Guests were still mingling, but their conversations were quieter, more hesitant. Julia and Felipe were at the center of it all, still glowing with happiness, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. I scanned the room for Lara, and there she was, still moving like a shadow through the crowd. Her smile was as sharp as ever, her eyes darting from one guest to the next, always calculating, always watching. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, wondering how much further she could push before everything came crashing down. But not tonight, not on my watch. I walked through the crowd with purpose, my mind focused. I had no intention of letting Lara continue her charade any longer. I knew the truth, and it was time for everyone else to know it too. I made my way over to the head table, where Felipe and Julia were sitting, laughing and chatting with friends. As I approached, I could feel Lara's eyes on me from across the room. I wasn't going to back down. She had been making moves all night, but now it was my turn. I leaned down to whisper something in Julia's ear. I made sure to speak just loud enough for those around us to hear, but soft enough to seem like a private conversation. "Your new mother-in-law has been stealing from Felipe's trust fund for 3 years, I said, my voice calm and controlled. "I have the forensic accounting report in my purse, and the police are already investigating." Julia's face went pale as a sheet. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and confusion, trying to process what I had just said. I could see the weight of my words sink in, and I knew it would take a moment for the realization to hit. But then she glanced toward Felipe, who had stopped speaking and was staring at us, his hand frozen midair as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I turned to face the room, raising my voice so that everyone could hear. "I'm sorry to interrupt this beautiful celebration," I said, my tone steady. "But I believe there's been some confusion that needs to be addressed." The room fell silent. It was as if time had stopped. I took a step back, making sure I had everyone's attention. Then I pulled a folded document out of my purse and held it up for all to see. "This is a forensic accounting report," I continued, showing that over the past 3 years, approximately $180,000 has been withdrawn from Felipe's trust fund for what Lara here has labeled as management expenses. The gasps that followed were like a thunderclap. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, some full of disbelief, others filled with growing suspicion as the truth started to sink in. "Management expenses," I repeated, my voice cold and cutting. "Let's take a look at what those expenses really were." I unfolded the report further, revealing details of Lara's spending, lease payments for her luxury car, a $35,000 kitchen renovation, 2 European vacations that cost nearly $30,000. I didn't need to say any more. The numbers spoke for themselves. Lara's face flushed with rage. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out, but she couldn't escape. The truth was out, and there was nowhere for her to hide. "You told Felipe that the trust fund was underperforming," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "You told him he should be grateful it hadn't lost more money, but what you didn't tell him was that you were taking it for yourself." The silence in the room was deafening. I saw Felipe's face shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to something else, something much darker. His hands were trembling as he reached for the document, pulling it from my hand and reading it for himself. "Is this true?" Felipe asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes locked onto Lara's, and I saw the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Lara, desperate, tried to defend herself, her voice rising in panic. "I was just protecting the trust," she stammered. "I've been managing everything for years. You can't understand what I've done for this family." I could see the cracks in her composure now. She was unraveling, trying to hold onto her facade, but it was slipping through her fingers. "You were never protecting anyone," I said, stepping closer to her. "You were using them. You were using all of us." And then, just as I thought the confrontation was over, a voice from the back of the room interrupted. "That's funny," the voice said, deep and amused, "because I have my own report showing that the Chen family trust is much larger than Felipe's." The crowd parted, and Robert Chen, Julia's father, stood up from his seat, his tone sarcastic but calm. "In fact," he continued, "I think I can safely say we don't need to worry about a penny being mismanaged here." Robert's words were like a dagger to Lara's heart. Her face turned ashen, and she took an involuntary step back. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, eyes wide with panic. "Well, it turns out," Robert said, stepping forward with confidence, "that my daughter's trust fund was set up years ago with money from the sale of my family's accounting firm. Not only that, but I have full documentation of every cent that has ever been spent from it." He turned toward the rest of the guests, his voice booming now. "I think it's safe to say that the real question here is, what has Lara been hiding?" The room exploded into chaos. People were gasping, talking over each other, and some were already pulling out their phones to document the scene. Lara's plan, her carefully crafted web of lies, had come crashing down around her. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I reached into my purse once more, this time pulling out a thick stack of papers. "And here's the final kicker," I said. "This is the original trust agreement that David set up for Felipe. The one Lara told him was too complicated to understand." I handed the papers to Felipe, who was now holding them with trembling hands. He read them carefully, his face growing colder by the second. "According to this document," I said, "you were supposed to get full control of the property after you married. Lara was never supposed to be part of that equation. All this time, she's been living off your inheritance while pretending to be your devoted stepmother." Lara's face crumpled as the last shred of her dignity slipped away. She turned toward the exit, but before she could leave, Detective Williams stepped forward. "Lara Costa," he said, his voice firm, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft." The guests were in shock, but I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. This was it. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back. As Detective Williams led Lara out of the pavilion, I could see the crowd's reaction shift from disbelief to support for Felipe and Julia. The truth had come to light, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter for their family. Felipe stood looking at me with wide, confused eyes, but also something else, gratitude. "You saved us," he whispered. I nodded, smiling at him. It was the least I could do. The wedding was far from perfect, but in that moment, the air felt lighter. And for the first time all night, I allowed myself to truly breathe. The chaos that had erupted in the garden pavilion began to settle, but the air still hummed with tension. Guests were slowly picking up their conversation, but it was clear the night had taken an unexpected turn. The celebration was over, replaced by whispered discussions and the hum of disbelief. I could feel eyes on me as I stood in the center of it all, my heart still pounding from the confrontation. Felipe and Julia were surrounded by a small crowd of family and close friends, and I could see that Julia's expression was a mix of relief and exhaustion. Her face had gone pale earlier, but now there was a quiet strength behind her eyes. Felipe, too, was standing taller, no longer the confused young man who had stumbled into a trap set by Lara. The weight of the truth had lifted from his shoulders, but it was replaced by the burden of what had just happened. "Grandma," Felipe said, his voice raw with emotion as he approached me. "I don't even know what to say. I never saw any of this coming." I smiled at him, my heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to say anything, Felipe. You don't need to thank me. I did what any grandmother would do to protect her family. But I just can't believe it." His voice wavered. "Lara, she was the one who was always there for me after Dad died. I never realized." "I know," I said softly, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Grief is a powerful thing, and sometimes it blinds us to the truth, but that's why I'm here, to make sure the truth comes out no matter how difficult it is." Julia joined us, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out to hold my hand. "You don't know how much this means to us." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "You're part of this family now. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Around us, the crowd was still abuzz, and I could hear snippets of conversation. Some were congratulating Felipe and Julia, others were exchanging opinions about the shocking revelations. But there was a distinct change in the atmosphere. People were no longer looking at the young couple with pity or uncertainty. They were looking at them with respect, with understanding. The narrative had shifted. Lara's manipulation was exposed, and now it was time for the truth to reign. I stepped away from Felipe and Julia, giving them a moment to breathe. I needed to speak with Patricia, who had been working behind the scenes, collecting evidence, piecing together the puzzle that had allowed us to pull the rug out from under Lara. She had been invaluable in making this moment possible. I found Patricia near the exit, speaking with one of the detectives. She looked up as I approached, a knowing smile crossing her face. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. I nodded. "We did it. The truth is finally out, but there's more to come," Patricia added, her voice turning serious. "The investigation isn't over. We've only scratched the surface. There's a lot more that Lara has hidden, and I'm sure she's not done yet." I looked back at the newlyweds who were still surrounded by friends and family. We'll deal with it, one step at a time. Just then, Detective Williams approached us, a folder in his hands. He looked grim, but there was a sense of resolve in his eyes. "Mrs. Alvarado," he said, his voice steady. "We've got all the paperwork in order. Lara's arrest is just the beginning. We've traced more accounts linked to her, more funds that have been siphoned off from Felipe's trust. She's not just been stealing from him, but from multiple sources within the family business. It's going to take time, but we'll follow the trail wherever it leads." I nodded, feeling a sense of finality but also a deep resolve. This wasn't over yet. The battle had been won, but the war for justice was still raging. Lara's web of deceit ran deep, and there was no telling how many lives she had affected with her greed and manipulation. But we were on the right side now, and we would make sure she paid for what she had done. I turned back to Felipe and Julia, who were talking quietly with some of their guests. The night had been a whirlwind, but I could already see the weight lifting off their shoulders. The storm had passed, and they were free to move forward, stronger than before. "Grandma, I still can't believe how it all happened," Felipe said again, his voice soft. "I feel like I've been living in a fog for so long." "Don't worry," I said, giving him a reassuring smile. "You've woken up now, and it's time to rebuild, start fresh. This is your moment." Julia smiled at me, her eyes full of gratitude. "We can't do it without you." I looked around at the room full of people, some of whom had already begun to leave, their murmurs still echoing in the background. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while I felt hopeful. The night had begun with secrets, lies, and betrayal, but now it was ending with something far more precious: the truth, the strength of family, and the promise of a new beginning. Felipe and Julia's future was uncertain, yes, but they would face it together, no longer burdened by the weight of deception. As I stood there with my family, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most rewarding victories, and no matter what came next, we had already won. The following weeks were a blur of activity. The wedding had ended in chaos, but in its wake, something beautiful began to grow. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the freedom to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. Felipe and Julia were determined to leave the past behind them. They focused on their love, their new life together, and the bright future they had ahead of them. The trust fund, once a symbol of manipulation and betrayal, was now a foundation they could trust, one that would help secure their future, not tear it apart. As for Lara, her world crumbled as the full extent of her crimes came to light. The police investigation, led by Detective Williams and Patricia, unearthed even more fraudulent activity, money siphoned off from multiple sources within the family's businesses. The justice system would have its say, but it was clear that the damage she caused would haunt her for the rest of her life. I continued to stay close to Felipe and Julia, offering guidance when they needed it and watching as they grew stronger every day. Watching them take control of their destiny, knowing that they no longer had to live in fear of betrayal, filled me with pride. The wedding that had begun with so much uncertainty and tension had ultimately paved the way for a stronger, more united family. We had faced the storm, and we had come out on the other side with the truth as our shield. Months later, I found myself in the garden of my home, sipping tea and watching Felipe and Julia laugh together as they played with their new puppy. The world seemed right again. There was peace in their eyes, peace that had come from the hard-earned lesson that nothing was more important than loyalty, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what was right. "You did it, Grandma," Felipe said, walking over to me with Julia by his side. "You saved us. We owe everything to you." I smiled at them both, feeling a warmth in my heart that made all the struggles worth it. "No, you did it," I said softly. "You found the strength to stand up for yourselves, and that's the greatest victory of all. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I knew that everything we had fought for had brought us to this moment, this new beginning. The past was behind us, and a bright future lay ahead. Family had been tested, but it had survived, and as long as we had each other, nothing could ever tear us apart again. With that, I took one last sip of my tea, watching the love and laughter of my family around me, knowing that despite everything, we had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The story of betrayal and deception had ended, but the story of family, love, and resilience was only just beginning.